Let's see if I made sure it wasn't. I'll keep sharing, or did that change? Okay. This morning when I started the record button, it quit sharing. I don't know why, but we have been having technical difficulties today at the college. I'm sure you're aware of that. Today we are covering the ancient Aegean area of the world. So we're moving a little bit northward from Egypt now and getting into them. Their art has some characteristics that kind of carry over from Neolithic and Mesopotamian and Egyptian art. I think from just that picture, you can probably figure out what that characteristic is. But it's also quite a bit different from the others. And of course, eventually these guys will become Greece a while down the road, which is why on Monday we're talking about Greece. They're the people group to follow. So I pulled the map in first just to give you an idea of the area we're talking about today. We are going to be talking about the Mycenaeans, the Cycladic people, and the Minoans. Starting off with the Cycladic Islands because it's the oldest people group among the three, and then moving through that. This area was developed long after Mesopotamia and Egypt, so it's newer, but still way before Greece. Well, the Greece that we think of when we think of Greece. Anyways, I guess I should preface with that. And the art of all three cultures is pretty specific to that particular group. They aren't the same. The Minoans and Mycenaeans have some similarities. The Cycladics are doing their own thing. And we're going to be going through each one of them. So it's not like we've been able to do so far, specifically with the Egyptians, of talk about one particular trend that was pretty similar throughout the entire few thousand years, or the Mesopotamians that had some carrying through trends and characteristics that went all the way through the time period. Now we're talking about three different groups of people. Yes, they're in the same area, but they aren't doing the exact same things. Are they trading with each other? Yes, they are. But they aren't stealing stuff as much. In that top note there, we're going to talk about a little more in a second. Both the Mycenaean and Minoan culture existed during what's known as Greece's heroic age. That's where most of the mythology from ancient Greece comes from, is these people. For a long time, people thought these areas were made up. They pop up in the story of the Iliad, which if you're interested, I posted this lecture. There's a little video here. It's a cartoon version, which I like. Very pared down 10-minute cartoon version of what happens in the Iliad. Totally recommend it. The cartoon version, not the actual. Yeah, I've read the actual thing is 600 pages. And then yeah, and the Odyssey is really long too. This is a 10-minute pared down version. Totally recommend it if you have time, because it does talk about some mythological stories that we're going to be mentioning next week too. If there's time after class, I might play it for anyone that's interested. But in 1870, all of these cities that are mentioned in the Iliad are found by Schliemann. Schliemann ends up uncovering multiple cities that pop up in the Iliad that everyone thought were just mythology for the longest time. One of them includes the city of Troy, which he excavated and discovered was destroyed in the 13th century, among several others that we're going to be talking about today. Fun stuff. We are going to also be talking about Agamemnon's Mycenaean kingdom. Agamemnon is one of the characters in the Iliad. If you do watch the video or read the book, you got a whole lot of free time. But as we are talking about some Greek mythology in real life, some of the things we're going to be talking about are where these myths were birthed. We are going to be talking about where the Minotaur was born, which is Minoan Crete, in a moment. We're going to be talking about the legendary city of Knossos, or the labyrinth that the Minotaur lived in. So you're kind of going to see a bit of a merging of myth and reality here with some of these cultures. Not so much the Cycladic people, which is where I said like we're starting today, but you will see them eventually. The labyrinth, or the kingdom of Knossos, was found by archaeologist Arthur Evans in the 1900s. And when we look at those blueprints later on, you'll really kind of get a grasp of why it might have been called the labyrinth. Of course, this culture, Minoans, are named after King Minos, who is another mythological figure. But as stated, we are starting off with the Cycladic people. They are the oldest people group, and they really are doing their own thing in art. Yeah, we haven't looked at anything like this, except for maybe like Paleolithic art, kind of a little bit borderline. This is a marble statue. Marble was in abundance in the Cycladic Islands. Like, they had a lot of it. So almost all of their statues are made of marble. We find a large amount of these humanish sculptures. They would bury them in mounds with dead bodies, possibly as a symbol of who the person was, maybe family members or someone to keep them company, possibly a symbol of status. We aren't really sure. Not all of them are standing. Sometimes they are in seated position. Sometimes they're actually doing things like playing musical instruments. Just like our Paleolithic era sculptures, there is emphasis placed on really the nudity of this figure. She is obviously a female, and they have put emphasis on her breasts and her abdomen area where her arms cross. Her belly is sticking out a little bit further from below. And the pubic region is outlined. There's a little triangle there. We do know these would not have been standing originally. They are on display in museums standing up, but they were all found laying down. And if you notice, her feet are pointed. So just like the dead person in the grave was laying down, these would have also been laying down. Most of them would have at one time been painted with eyes and lips to give them a little bit more realism. But of course, that has worn away. Now, when these were found in the 1900s, they became extremely popular because in contemporary art at that point in time, abstract sculptures were popular. These themselves look a little bit like an abstract sculpture. So artists began creating artworks that referenced these sculptures. We'll look at some in a second. But collectors also wanted to purchase these very badly. When there's a high demand for things like ancient art and a limited amount of actual artifacts, scammers latch on to that. So because of its popularity and the high demand for these, a lot of people started making fakes. And we have issues today determining what's real and what's not. But here's another one. This one is seated playing a harp with a duck bill or swan bill on top of it. So of course, is a male. But as I said, not all of them are standing. Some of them are sitting down. Some of them are doing things like this one. And this one was also found in a grave. But just like last one, common motifs, very geometric, abstract shapes used for the form. Good activated. Very influential to modern art. Here's another unknown cycladic figure, very different from the first female we looked at, and someone that used it as a reference, Hans Arp, in a later sculpture. Another comparison, this is Modigliani's. It's a very, very influential people group to contemporary art. Brancusi's very referential piece. Here's Henry Moore's. Henry Moore known for doing quite abstract figure work. And the last one we'll look at is Archipenko's in comparison to the female that we looked at a second ago. Well, a different female, but the same form. Yeah, really important for contemporary sculpture that these artworks were found and then put on displays in museums. It's just unfortunate that people made a bunch of fakes. And that is actually it for the Cycladic people. That is what we have from them, is their sculptures, their marble sculptures left behind. So can someone sum up what, like, one of the main characteristics of the Cycladic sculptures or Cycladic art might be? Yeah, good. Yeah, okay, that's the premise of that one. Like I keep saying, really different from the rest of the groups that we're going to be talking about, really different from anyone that we've talked about so far. We are next going to move on to the Minoans. Minoans, most well known for the myth of the Minotaur and the Labyrinth in King Minos, then really probably their art or architecture. They did create really interesting architectural buildings. We're going to look at Knossos in a second, which is where the labyrinth came from. And all of their palace complexes would have been decked out like the Egyptian and Mesopotamian palace complexes with art on the walls, so paintings and frescoes. So we're going to look at our little myth here because it's only about 4 minutes and we have time for that in case anyone needs a refresher.
Satisfaction guaranteed, works every time.
I'm going to start that over because this is a really clever joke and it's kind of true.
Pro tip, character designers, if you're struggling to come up with a monster design, try just mashing random animals together. Satisfaction guaranteed, works every time. Ancient Greece was certainly a big fan of the concept, as basically every monster in the mythos is either a regular person or animal with a non-standard number of limbs, heads, or eyes, or 2 or more animals mashed together. It's usually not even explained why they're like that. Why is the offspring of Poseidon and Medusa a horse with wings? Who knows? Why do Typhon and Echidna, 2 mostly humanoid, somewhat snaky monsters, produce several multi-headed dogs and 1 perfect combo of goat, snake, and lioness? Primordial genetics is funky like that. And geez, the Minotaur? What unholy union could have made a half bull, half dude? Well, actually, that one is pretty straightforward, but you're not gonna like it. Now, contextually, the Minotaur is a kind of mysterious figure because the Minoan civilization he's derived from is pretty unknown in a lot of ways. It was a powerful Bronze Age civilization that flourished on the island of Crete from 3000 BCE.
So those are some of the ruins of Knossos, in case you want to see what it looks like today.
To about 1100 BCE. And it's not 100% clear what caused it to fall apart, but it super fell apart so hard we didn't even know it existed until 1900. We have tons of their relics and architecture and stuff, and also a lot of their writing, but unfortunately we can't understand any of it. Yep, it's all in linear A and mysterious hieroglyphs, and we can't read any of them.
Yeah, no one's deciphered linear A yet, at all. People have been trying for decades and no one can do it. So hey, if you got some free time, maybe try doing that. Funny enough, there have been several languages that have been uncovered just because someone had free time and did it as a side hobby. So I joke, but it can happen.
We kind of have no idea what they were up to. But because of their extensive trade network, plenty of civilizations we can't understand were influenced by them. And we have lots of myths and stories and maybe even some gods that seem to have been originally derived from the largely unknown Minoan religion. Now, basically everything about that is pure speculation. But if there's one thing we can say with confidence, it's that bulls show up a lot, not minotaurs though. While bull-headed humans show up in Greek art about Crete, Minoan art itself only ever shows regular bulls. The Minotaur is a specifically Greek story about the ancient Minoans, referencing their widespread bull symbolism by peppering in bulls and bull accessories in regular rituals. It also frames the mythologized Minoan civilization in a generally antagonistic role, possibly because of all the forced oceanic trade, also known as piracy. So basically, it's biased, filtered, and offset from the source by several centuries. But we have nothing else to go on because we can't read their language. Let this be a PSA. Don't let languages die, kids. You're going to really annoy scholars in like 3,000 years. So anyway, the tale of the Minotaur begins with King Minos of Crete, the son of Zeus and Europa. So we're already up to a roaring start in the functional relationships department. In order to prove that he's a bad enough dude to rule Crete instead of his brothers Rhadamanthus or Sarpedon, Minos calls in a favor from Poseidon, who sends him a beautiful snow-white bull, with the understanding that Minos is going to sacrifice the bull to him afterwards as thanks. Everyone is super impressed with this steak in the making, and Minos becomes king, but he's just so impressed with this bull that he refuses to sacrifice it and swaps it out for a way lamer, super less hot bull. Poseidon is enraged by this slight, so he slips Aphrodite a 20 together to make Minos' wife Pasiphae fall in love with the bull. What could go wrong? But unlike Pasiphae, the Cretan bull has very high standards. First of all, being a quadruped is a must. Second of all, must also be a cow. Fortunately, from a certain point of view, acclaimed architect, inventor, and future part-time aeronaut Daedalus happens to be on Crete at the time, so Pasiphae commissions him to make her a hollow wooden cow suit for recreational purposes. Daedalus, consummate professional that he is, takes the commission with zero outward judging, and I'm just going to skip over this part because, come on, we get it. Oh, hey, where'd that thing come from? So the Minotaur, as the child abomination of a truly beastly relationship, doesn't really have a place in the natural order of things, which unfortunately means he can't really eat anything besides people. Tragic. Rather than, I don't know, killing him or letting him starve or something, Minos consults the Oracle at Delphi, who tells him to build that sucker a lavish-based apartment in the Key. Daedalus scores another commission when Minos asks him to build an absolutely massive labyrinth for the Minotaur. Then, to make sure nobody learns how the labyrinth works, Minos locks Daedalus up in a tower with Icarus, 5 tons of supplies, and every tool ever made. That ought to hold him, but that's a story for 4 years ago, apparently. So anyway, with the Minotaur functionally imprisoned in a really big and possibly complicated maze, that fixes the potential rampage problem, but still leaves the whole food issue kind of up in the air. What's the point of being king if you can't be kind of a dick about it? The exact justifications vary from telling, but long story short, Minos demands a human sacrifice of 14 young Athenians every few years to keep the Minotaur fed. This goes smoothly for the first couple sacrifices, but on the third go-round, this whole Minotaur human sacrifice situation draws the attention of a spunky young hero aiming to prove himself. Specifically Theseus, Athens' founder hero and official best boy, which really reflects more poorly on Athens than anything else. Anywho, Theseus brings a big cool boat and plenty of gumption, but not much in the way of a plan. So it's lucky for him that Minos' daughter Ariadne takes one look at the new cute boy and goes full head over heels for him, possibly because she doesn't get out much. Now, Ariadne is very familiar with the labyrinth. In fact, in one early citation of the story mentioned in the Iliad, it suggests that the original version of Daedalus' labyrinth was built specifically for Ariadne as a dancing path with no Minotaur involved. Mythologically, Ariadne and the labyrinth go way back, maybe even farther back than the Minotaur. And some people theorize Ariadne is actually originally some kind of Cretan goddess known as the mistress of the labyrinth, which is dope as all hell, but not what we're here for. Ariadne helps Theseus out by giving him a ball of bread, but on a clue that'll let him retrace his path out of the labyrinth. And Theseus makes his way down with her guidance, eventually finding the Minotaur and engaging it in totally rad combat until he manages to decapitate it. You're welcome, Minos. And so ends the tale of the Minotaur. Surprisingly, I think it's surprising. Minos doesn't seem too happy to have his monster problem fixed, and Theseus and Ariadne book it out of Crete along with the other Athenians. But for whatever reason, later retconned as divine intervention, but originally just kind of a huge dick move, Theseus totally ditches Ariadne and leaves her alone on the shores of Naxos while she sleeps. Fortunately, when she wakes up, her grief and betrayal is mitigated somewhat by the fact that Dionysus himself shows up to help her out and also maybe propose or something because he thinks she's really cute. And they end up getting married and living very happy immortal lives together up on Olympus. While in contrast, Theseus' love life goes not well. What with all the kidnapping and personally pissing off Hades and such. Yeesh, javelin dodge. Moral of the story? Probably, Keep your promises, be true to your responsibilities, and, oh yeah, stop phoning animals. Jeez, guys.
So, she's that's the same one that does the summary of the Iliad too, if you like that. It's fun. But unfortunately, the real life Knossos is not nearly as interesting as the mythological story of the Minotaur is. As mentioned in there, there are a bunch of bull motifs with the Minoans, which kind of helps spawn that myth. We don't know why all of the bulls are there because we can't read anything, which is sucky. But we are going to take a look at Knossos, or the Great Labyrinth. The word labyrinth comes from ladders or double axes. Those double axis symbols happen to be on all of the doorways of Knossos and most Minoan palaces. So also kind of adding to that myth of the labyrinth there. Not as cool though. Two axes, woo! Yeah, the palace complex is a bit odd. It is set up in clusters of rooms, all grouped near each other. The rooms were generally arranged with like this section's for living quarters, this section's for holding grain, this section's for audience halls, all together in a really complex layout because you had to go through multiple rooms to get to another room, which is why it gets the word labyrinth too. It's just a weird layout. We'll look at the blueprint in a second. From the outside in this reconstruction, it doesn't look nearly as weird as it does from within. The central feature of Knossos is the rectangular court, which we're going to look at in a moment. It would have housed ceremonies for the wealthy people that lived in the palace. Later on, the Greeks will allow all members of society to go to these events, but back in this age, the only people who got to go were the rich people.
It wasn't, if I remember, the big thing was when they were riding.
Yeah, yeah,
floor.
yeah, we're gonna get to that in a second.
Okay, is that what the like only the high people?
Not this one.
Okay.
This is for like theaters.
Oh.
Plays,
Like,
music, things going on, you know, relaxing stuff. Entertainment. We're gonna get to the bull leaping though. Bull leaping was something that everyone could go watch. Yeah. We'll get to that momentarily though. And most structures in this palace were multi-level as well. So this is the first time we've talked about any sort of architectural feature that had multiple stories. The most they had was 3. In a few weeks, we'll talk about one that had 16. Which you don't really equate with ancient cultures, but there is one that had 16 stories on something, and we'll get to that. But yeah, most of these living places had 3 stories for rooms, so there were a lot of people living in these palace complexes, and there's a lot going on. They also developed terracotta pipes for plumbing. Did the plumbing actually really bring water to you like the Romans? No. But it did function as a drainage system, which is good. We'll take it. Don't need it so much around here too often. Although if we had it, maybe we wouldn't have flooded streets. Yeah. It's my issue with the cities around here. Funny. So here is that blueprint plan that I mentioned, and it's really these areas over here that give it that term of a maze. So you can kind of see this is the storehouse area, by the way, that in order to get through it, you really have to go through a bunch of areas to weave your way in and out, which can be confusing if you're not a permanent resident. If you're a permanent resident, you probably know where you're going. Although I'd probably still get lost. I'm not very good at those things. Now, in the residential quarters area, this is that little courtyard, but on the residential section with the courtyard looking out, there are columns. Does anyone know what's funky with these columns?
mean pretty much upside down.
Yeah, they're upside down. Yeah, yeah. Definitely upside down. Normally for a column, the thing that's at the top would be on the bottom as a base. You can have something called a capital at the top, but usually it's kind of thin-ish, not giant. A normal column would have a base, that's really bad. And then columns, and then like a capital at the top. And generally, it's pretty level throughout as far as like width, dimensions, diameter. Those columns, however, start wider at the top and thin out as they go down. Very backwards, not structurally so. Normally, you'd want your thicker area at the bottom for support and then thin it out, which is how the Greeks start off making their columns. They start off making them really thick at the bottom and then trying to thin them out as they go up. Eventually, they figure out how to make them the same throughout the entire way. But yeah, so yet another culture that had columns way before the Greeks, even though the Greeks are known for columns. We've looked at columns from the Mesopotamians, from the Egyptians, and now from the Minoans. All of them did their columns their own way. As you can see, these are painted. These are not the original, well, they technically are. They've been refinished. When they were found, they didn't have any paint on them. Some of them had like cracks and missing things. They were wooden, so some of them had deteriorated. This was redone by Schliemann when he excavated the site. Some people have issues with the fact that he went and fixed it. Some people like the idea that he went and fixed it. There is this divide in art history with the people that support the idea of refinishing and repurposing and refurbishing artworks that are found that have been destroyed over time. And then there is the group that says, no, leave it as it is. I don't know which side I'm on, honestly. With this one, I kind of appreciate that he redid it, but I wish he'd only redone some of them so we could see what some of them actually look like now. They would have originally been painted red and black. The next image that we're going to look at, well, the next few images are also images that he fixed. The really famous one that Brandon's thinking of the bull leaping, a good chunk of it was redone. So it's just speculation that that's what it looked like. Same with these, it's just speculation that that's what it looked like. There's no certainty. So that's why a lot of people don't support the idea of redoing stuff, because you don't know exactly what it looked like. But some people appreciate it too. So like I mentioned, the Minoan palaces would have been covered in frescoes. This is a fragment of one of the frescoes of a Minoan woman, possibly a goddess, from that same palace that we looked at. We aren't sure who it is exactly, but there are some characteristics with this fresco that you might recognize from Mesopotamian Egypt. Doesn't mean they took it from them. No, it's just similar. Anyone notice what's kind of similar? Yeah, profile view. So we've talked about now 3 ancient cultures that did profile view for a long time. Something else that's kind of similar, particularly to the Mesopotamians, is that large eye. The Minoans do the large eye thing too, for the same reasons as the Mesopotamians, that it's like giving reverence or being attentive to something. But the Minoans do something different as well, particularly to show who's a man and who's a woman. If you are a female, you will have white skin in your painting. If you are a man, you will have tan skin in your painting. With the Minoan culture, that is how they denoted sex. Why white and why tan? I don't know. Maybe because the women did wear makeup in this time. You can kind of already tell from her red painted lips there. So perhaps that was the makeup style. She put white powder on your face. We've looked at other, well, you've probably heard of other cultures that use white powder as a makeup. Maybe that was just their ideal beauty. We don't know. We can't read their stuff. She is named La Parisienne because of her hair, which is in a curled coiffure, and her red painted lips, as well as her highly decorated garment that she's wearing. So she's called the Parisian. This is a buon fresco. All of the frescoes that we're talking about today are buon frescoes. Does anyone know what a buon fresco is?
No,
There's a buon fresco and there's a fresco secco.
okay, yeah, so it's gonna be, it's like the texture, the background of the.
Yeah.
Oh.
Buon fresco is a true fresco or a wet fresco, which is one of the reasons why we still have these. It's going to last longer. They mix in the pigment with the plaster before it's applied. And a chemical reaction takes place with the lime in the plaster, which crystallizes and really adheres the colors to it. So your buon frescoes are definitely going to be more durable, which is, like I said, one of the reasons why we still have some of these fragments. So good on them. Fresco secco is the opposite. It's when your plaster's already dried on your wall and you're just painting over top. Those don't last as long. Another fresco, though, is the bull leaping. This is the one that I mentioned a second ago, that a good chunk of it has been redone. The dark pieces here are not original. They were fixed by Schlieben. Is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing? I don't know. Once again, you see white and tan. The white figures are female, the tan figure is a male. And what is happening here is a traditional ceremony that happened regularly in the Minoan culture of bull leaping. It was a bit of a game or competition. You would go and be brave. The bull would be charging at you and you would try and leap over it while it was charging.
No.
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 It didn't.
No.
Oh,
I'm sure a lot of people died. Yeah. I mean, even today with the running of the bulls, people die every year. I mean, this sounds a little more dangerous than that even. Maybe. I don't know. I've seen some of those videos of running the bulls. I don't want to do it. No. But now we see full body portraits of these people instead of just faces like the last one. They did not do the human body the way the Mesopotamians or the Egyptians did. Yes, it is in profile view. Yes, there are large eyes, but something's going on with the shape. Anyone noticed it?
with the shape of, like the round, the circles?
No, no. I'm just thinking. Someone might notice that. What's wrong with that body? Waist. It's like itty bitty.
They're super tiny.
Yeah, itty bitty. That's traditional for Minoan figures to create a pinched waist. So it really looks like the top torso is teetering on top of these legs here with that itty bitty little waist there. Even the man has the itty bitty little waist.
Maybe to show movement
maybe,
and
um,
flexibility.
maybe. They would do it on figures that are just standing
really?
too, though. So if we could see the full body of her, she would have it too, and she's just standing there. It's just how they chose to show. It was a stylistic choice for them that they stuck with.
I mean, they had the shape.
Yeah. Mhm. I mean, it's the basic geometric shape of the torso and legs. Geometric era Greek art kind of does a similar thing. You can even make out the triangle that would have been used for the top part here. But it's interesting. Now, we do have really well preserved wall murals from Thera, which was under Minoan control. And that is because the same thing that happened to Pompeii happened to Thera. It was buried under volcanic ash. Not the same volcano, different one. But it was buried for a really long period of time. So we have a lot of frescoes well, not perfectly, but really, really well preserved from them, thanks to that seismic eruption. But unlike Knossos' palace murals, the murals in Thera are in regular homes too. So not just a palace. So this would have been just a home decoration like today we put stuff on our walls too. Yeah. And here is one of the landscape paintings from that city. This is called the Spring Fresco. This is the largest of all of the murals found from Thera. And it is obviously a landscape painting. It's not a realistic interpretation of landscape by any means, but it does kind of capture the essence of nature. It was based off of the landscape in Thera as well. Mm-hmm. I enjoy looking at this one. I like the rolling patterns and the vegetation and flowers that are going out. There's birds flying in the background.
Those mountains supposed to be around the back. Side is like going to be representing like that. Islands around.
Are you talking about that top band?
Yeah.
The top band was solid red.
Oh, okay.
It looks kind of like mountains now, though. Yeah. Any other thoughts on this one?
I'm not gonna lie, it kind of reminds me of Dr. Seuss.
I know.
Oh yeah, with the
yeah. That's usually what I think of when I see it, which is kind of why I like it.
Yeah.
Takes me back to childhood. Yeah, because that's how he did his trees and stuff.
The trees look really cool.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else have anything? Thanks, Grace.
That's cool. Really good.
The war axe, you know.
Yeah.
Just way before the war axe.
He's in there somewhere.
He's in there.
Yeah. Minoans also produced a lot of pottery. If you remember back to when I started talking about the agricultural revolution, they switched from hunting gathering to like storing and growing food. So most of the pottery from the Minoans, as well as most of the other cultures that we've been talking about, was for the purpose of containing things and preserving it. But they did have a pretty distinctive style. Most of the Minoan pottery shows their love for nature, just like that fresco from Thera did. So there's one that I took out that has an octopus on it. I love that octopus one. I was sad that I took it out. So if you have time, maybe check it out because it fits the vase so well.
It's in the book.
Yeah, it's in the book.
Yeah.
It's a perfectly round vessel. And the octopus legs wrap around it just gorgeously. My compositional aesthetic loving self loves that one. But this one here, it was made using a potter's wheel. These people did have potter's wheels. It is named after the cave that it was found in, the Chimeras cave. And it does use a black background with light tan, and this would have been red. You can kind of see where the red would have been on it. And it's just fish with nets and waves. The waves are being symbolized by the waves here, and the swirling patterns up here are also waves. There's the fish net and the fish itself, and it's a repetitive pattern that continues on the other sides as well. And there's more waves up top too. So showing their interests, they are interested in bulls, they are interested in nature itself as well. Different from the Egyptians, different from the Mesopotamians, who are more interested in showing off power and the importance of life and death. But it also suits them as they are a smaller culture that lived near beaches and things that had abundance of fish and wildlife as well. What were you saying, Brandon?
I just said the resource.
Yeah, the resources that they had in comparison to Egypt, which was the desert.
Yeah.
They had some resources, different kinds of resources though. Where
Rock.
things they could make money off versus things you can live off of. Another Minoan sculpture, this is the snake goddess. We think it's a goddess. We think it's a priestess. We're not sure. There's debate going on. She was made using faience. Faience is firing the clay at a low enough level to give it the appearance of glass. It's a long, low firing process, very long, low. And eventually you'll get a shiny opaqueness to that clay if you made it thin enough when you were sculpting the figure in the first place. It takes skill.
A very long time.
Yeah, it takes a lot of time, it takes skill. This was, of course, more colorful when it was first made. I think you can probably tell looking at it, though, that it was probably pretty bright and vivid since some of the colors still exist today. She is wearing an interesting piece of clothing. It was a pretty traditional piece of clothing for priestesses, which is why a lot of people think it's a priestess. She is wearing a long skirt with a clothing item that's cinched in her waist a little bit and an open bodice. Interesting style choices. She is wearing, she's carrying two snakes in each hand, well, one snake. And she has a leopard sitting on her head. Yeah.
Oh, the cat.
It's kind of, leopards are cats. Technically. She is in a very stiff, rigid pose, kind of like the Egyptian art, but a lot different from the Egyptians as well. Because even though it's stiff and rigid, it still looks like she's trying to perform some action.
Really so scary.
Yeah, I thought she was scary the first time I saw her when I was like 17. I was like, oh, this is kind of creepy looking. I don't think she's meant to be creepy. But she is a bit creepy. So we've looked at wall murals, a palace, some sculptures, some pottery. One last bit of pottery, the harvest vase. This is probably the most impressive piece of pottery that we're going to be talking. It is the most impressive piece of pottery that we're going to talk about today, because this small section that we're looking at here is 5 inches. 5 inches.
That's it.
That is it. So, exactly. It is 5 inches and it is that detailed. Very, very impressive. This was not a clay vessel. This was carved by hand, yes. It originally had gold leaf on it. This was not your normal vessel.
No, he made it to where it looks like.
Yeah, so he carved it in a low relief to make it look like it's popping out. It kind of adds to the idea of movement. It depicts a crowd walking, crowd of men in particular walking, and they are singing and shouting while they are walking. The main guy here, If you look at him close enough, he is shouting so hard that you can see his rib cage. Yeah, because if you know, if you're like taking in a lot of breath and letting it out all at once, sometimes you can see ribs. So really trying to detail it as much as possible. Yeah. There's some fields going on in the background. This guy's carrying a pitchfork. So maybe they were on their way to the fields to work and singing and shouting along the way. That sounds like a fun day at work. Like, honestly, that doesn't sound as bad as it should be. I don't want to go work in a field, but if we're going to sing and shout along the way, I might get into it.
Now you were
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that'd be tricky.
Yeah. The artist did use combined frontal and profile views. Yeah, it's 5
Not the way
inches.
around, too.
That's just this section we're looking at is 5
Okay.
inches.
So the whole base,
I mean, it's in the round, so.
but it's like that little bit.
Mhm. Yeah. So definitely the most impressive piece of pottery we have seen so far, and the most impressive one we're going to see today. But all things come to an end. Eventually, the Minoan civilization does decline. We don't know exactly why. There's a lot of debate as to how it happened. But the Mycenaeans end up taking over Crete and Knossos by the end of what's called the New Palace period of Minoan culture, which is when Knossos was built. They go through several palace periods because the first set of palaces end up burning down. And then the New Palace period is what we actually have left. But it ended shortly after it. And the Mycenaeans will end up ruling over the area until 1200 BCE. And they end up really falling into obscurity, and everyone forgets that they existed, and people even think they don't exist around 1400 BCE. And then finally, again, in the late 1800s, they're rediscovered. The long period of disappearing.
Yeah. Like 600 years.
More than 600,
More, I
because
mean,
1400 BCE, that's
1400.
1400. And then you add 1870 to that.
That's a long. It is long.
Oh, you
I'm
guys
not doing
actually
that.
were real. Okay, cool. So our last culture we are talking about today are the Mycenaeans, and then we'll pick up in the area with Greece on Monday. Mycenaeans were most likely the forerunners of the mainland Greek people, so eventually Mycenaeans will probably become the Greeks, at least it's what we speculate. It's so sad going over this class and always having to use the word possibly, maybe, speculate, but it is what it is. Maybe eventually things will become a lot more clear. Who knows? I know. I know. You know the story.
Can reconstruct a lot of the, like,
Yeah.
architecture that's been lost. People map it out and then they
Yeah.
actually did it with, which is super nerdy, but the Assassin's Creed Odyssey game
Mhm.
is based off of ancient Greece. And they took the team there and mapped all of the
Yeah.
art, like the architecture that was there, took old blueprints and maps, and then rebuilt the city.
Yeah.
So
See, we can get like stuff like that and kind of get a sense of what it might have looked like, but there's no real definite answer.
yeah.
But we can get an idea, which is what our goal in this class is to get an idea of what they might have been like. But yeah, we don't have time travel yet. Yeah. I told you the story about the kid that I taught 1 year in 8th grade, right? I used to teach middle school for a few years. I had a kid, we were going over the Alamo, and he asked me if I saw it. At first I thought he meant like the movie. And he was like, no, did you see it? I'm like, dude,
Like you can go drive by.
And the date was on the board. I'm like, bruh.
I have a
Oh, that's awesome.
secret time traveling box.
That's what I told him, and he was like, really?
Yeah. I definitely
I
have
just
a.
push a button.
Totally.
Okay, his name was AD, and I will never forget him because that was not the first time
Oh,
that something like that was asked of me from him. I'll never forget that child. It's been years. Still know his name. He might pop up in other stories. He's really the most interesting child I've ever taught. I liked him though. I did like him. Homer, though, who is pictured here, described these Mycenaean people as very rich in gold. We will be seeing some gold from them. So they were a conquering people, very different from the Cyclades and Minoans that we've been talking about. It's one of the reasons why most people speculate the Minoans have declined was because Mycenaeans took over. Like I said, it's one of the speculations. There's a few though. And they do try and conquer most of mainland Greece. They also have palaces, quite impressive palace complexes, not complex blueprints. Your basic standard palace. And we can find a few different palace complexes from them, such as the one at Mycenae, which is the main reason why Mycenaeans are called Mycenaeans, is from the palace complex at Mycenae that we've discovered. There's also a Mycenaean palace complex at Tiryns too. This one is the aerial view of what's left of Tiryns palace complex. Just like the Minoans, the Mycenaean palaces were burned down around 1250 to 1200 BCE. So some things you might notice about this palace complex, it did have a fortified wall. And it did have, this being the central palace complex, a palace complex with smaller buildings throughout. And here's another diagram just to give you an idea of what things are. Funny enough, more mythology pops up with the Mycenaeans. Early Greek people thought the only way that these guys could have built such strong fortified cities was if the Cyclops helped them carry the stones. So myth, Cyclops carrying heavy stones to build walls. So that's the only way they could have ever done that. So in architecture, we grab onto that myth and call the manner in which they created this structure Cyclopean masonry. It's not too fancy. It really just means really large stones stacked on top of each other like here. I'll get to this one a little bit more in a second. But yeah, it's like rough stonework with really big stones is what Cyclopean masonry usually refers to. Very defense heavy city. In order to get into the city, they made you approach via a ramp. That was the only way to get in. And that ramp was so thin that you could only have a couple of soldiers, like if you were trying to attack side by side at a time. And the ramp was below the walls, so you could just shoot at them and knock them out. And then after the ramp, you had to go through several narrow gates to get in. So it was pretty easy to keep people out if you didn't want them coming in. The walls of the long gallery, which would be your approach ramp area, on the other side of it were 20 feet thick, so you couldn't breach the walls either. which now you're understanding why the ancient Greeks were like, oh, a Cyclops must have helped them build it, because there's no way to make 20 feet thick wall. There was a megaron located in the very center of the palace, which was the main reception hall and throne room. We're going to look at that in a second, a reconstruction of it. It was an interesting layout, and the Greeks do pull on the layout of it later on. So that's why we're going to talk about it a little bit more. Yeah, they used things like large stones, or there's Cyclopean masonry, and they built the ramps, they built gates that we're going to look at in a second, and they also built corbelled vaults. That's what this is. Corbelled vaults just means corbelled stones, which are rough, dry masonry stones stacked on top of each other, and you use the weight of the stones to hold up the entire passageway. It's a little bit of physics there. And gravity, a lot of gravity. And this is an image of Turin's corbel vaulted gallery. So you're kind of understanding, just looking at this, if you did breach the city, you wouldn't get too far in it. Because you can really only fit like one person down there at a time. So someone can just be chilling on the other end. Yeah. And of course, the main showroom, the Megaron, which is where the throne would sit. The Megaron did have an open ceiling in the very center, and under that ceiling would have been a fire pit. You can kind of see there. The Megaron in Nestor's palace in Pylos had frescoes on the ceiling, frescoes on the wall, frescoes on the tiles on the floor. Decked out. And of course, the throne would have been right here. That was really the reception hall where he met people.
It would have been really cool to see that.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And like I mentioned, they did have gates leading into the city. This is the gate from Mycenae's palace. This harkens back to the Ishtar gate and some of the other things that we've talked about, like the Lamassu gate from Mesopotamia. They used animals to try and dissuade invaders. Instead of mythical creatures like the Mesopotamians, these guys used 2 lions here. So we have a bit of dry masonry stacking here with really large stones. There is a post and lintel construction for the actual doorway. And then over top of that post and lintel is a low relief sculpture of 2 lions with 1 column in between them. This particular low relief was added after this was stacked to fit that exact spot. It is made of monolithic stones, this whole area. Monolithic stones are just really big stones. On this side, I think you can kind of see there's natural stone stacking that's happening because it's on the side of a mountain, this particular palace is, so they didn't have to worry too much about that. And once again, we have a columnal reference happening in yet another culture. This one is also kind of upside down looking, as the thicker area is at the top, while the thinner one is at the bottom. Of course, this is just a sculpture though. We don't have the heads of the lions anymore, but it's presumed just from accounts of the Greeks that they looked ferocious. And of course, this is one of the main gates. All of the gates would have had these leading up to really dissuade you from doing anything, just like the Mesopotamians did. They also had large tombs outside of their cities and palace complexes. This one's called the Treasury of Atreus. It's not actually a treasury though, it's a tomb. It would be under a mound of dirt. And then under that mound, you would see this large dome structure. This is the largest dome made before Roman times. It is made with your dry masonry stone stacking. It is 43 feet high and it is entirely closed off on top. All of these stones are tasked with holding up that dirt over top. These burial chambers or tholoses were primarily used, like ones this big, were used for important people. Smaller ones would hold multiple family members at one time. They did get buried with some important objects. We'll look at those in a second. But the reason why it's called the Treasury of Atreus was because there was a myth that there was a treasure of Atreus located somewhere in this region, and yeah, when they first found it, they thought that's what this was. It was empty when they found it. So, yeah. But now, after finding more of these Tholos mounds, we're learning that it's just a burial chamber. And this will be the largest vaulted space until we get to the Parthenon. Way later, and it uses a much sturdier material, aka concrete. Now, different setting. So most of the objects that we have from the Mycenaean culture was found in those burial mounds. So we're going to look at something from grave circle A in a second. Things that we have found are metal objects like jewelry and funerary masks and metal cups. We've also found sculptures and paintings in these, which kind of gives us a sense of their craftsmanship that they had. We are going to start with the funerary mask. Like I mentioned, they were buried with important stuff like funerary masks. We talked about a funerary mask already with Tutankhamun. It was placed over the person's face. It was supposed to represent what they looked like when they were alive. Is this, in what ways can you compare this to Tutankhamun's funerary mask? The material is the same. Remember, compare doesn't mean everything's the same. You can talk about contrasting things too. What's different? Yeah, this one's a lot simpler. So Tutankhamun's mask was made using melted down gold and then inlaid with stone. This is made using the technique repoussé, which is a lovely French word for beaten metal. So you get your sheet of metal and you beat it from behind to make the shapes. So a different technique is used, which is why it's a little bit simpler looking. When it's melted down, you can just get a mold, and you can make a mold very detailed with materials like plaster and clay to fit what you're wanting that thing to look like specifically. With repoussé, you gotta be able to hammer stuff. We'll look at some repoussé later on this semester from the medieval era, which is more detailed, but once again, it's from the medieval era, which is a ways down the road. But this is our first example of repoussé. They would try with these funerary masks to record different features. For example, this man has a mustache and a little goatee as well as a full beard, and try and make them a little bit individualized. But like you mentioned, it is simple. So there's not too much individuality that you can get with something this pared down. Something else that was found in one of the sites, ivory goddesses. We assume it's goddesses. We aren't sure yet. They're wearing the same skirt, open bodice that the snake goddess from the Minoan culture was wearing. Some people do believe that this was carved by a Minoan sculptor and then bought by a Mycenaean, but it was found in the Mycenaean territory, so who knows? It is made of one single large piece of ivory. This is 2 inches and 3 inches, 2 3/4 inches high. I can't stop it. So not too big, but for ivory, it's kind of a lot. I mean, it's not big.
But isn't ivory like fragile?
Ivory is very fragile and it's very hard to carve, yes. It's a delicate thing. Yeah, it's not all intact, so it's but yeah, when you're carving, you got to be delicate with what you're doing. But as I said, we aren't for sure who it depicts. There's 2 women here and 1 child. It's just presumed that it might be some goddesses with a child. So it could be done by, like I said, a Minoan sculptor. It could have been done by a Mycenaean person referencing Minoan sculptures, as they did conquer them. So maybe, possibly. But they had metalworking, they had sculpting with a precious thing like ivory. So we're seeing some more wealth from these people than we did the Cycladics or Minoan people, which were using more basic materials. They also have pottery, not anything up to the scale of the harvester's vase that we looked at earlier, though. This is a crater. If you check my class, you know what a crater is. It's a really large vessel for wine. But this one, if we're going to compare it to the harvester's vase, what do you think about it?
I mean, it's cool.
It's cool, yeah.
It is cool, the colors are cool.
Yeah.
Not detail.
No.
I mean,
And it's unexpected
It is.
detail, but.
Yeah, it's a different kind of detail.
this is
not
not it.
It's not as realistic or trying to be realistic
Or
as the other one. For some reason, it reminds me of some sort of cartoon that I used to watch as a kid because the noses.
I know.
And I can't think of
Doug.
what it is. Is it Doug?
Mm-hmm.
Is it Doug?
It is
Yeah, I
Doug.
think it is.
It's
It might be
Doug.
Doug.
Cause they all have the,
They do have really
They
good
all-
noses. It might be Doug.
yeah,
I don't remember. Some cartoon from Nickelodeon though.
yeah, I was watching the like, you guys do.
But yeah, profile view, every single one of them is identical. There's no individuality happening here. Unlike the harvester's vase where everyone was pretty individualized. But like Jess said, they weren't trying to do that here.
That was just to get you into it.
True, yes.
That's like a
That is
baby.
true. The other one coated in gold, obviously very time consuming to do.
Maybe not to get drunk on.
Probably more a item to show off to people. This one used to get drunk on.
Yeah.
Definitely a difference there. Pottery will eventually evolve. But of course, if you're familiar with Greek pottery, the next thing that's going to happen is the geometric period. Is that an evolution? Depends on your preferences. If you like geometric shapes, yes. If you do not like geometric shapes, no. But we'll get realistic with our pottery eventually on Monday. So in summary, we talked about 3 different people groups today. All of them are very different. The prehistoric Aegean area, though, was an area that was full of mythology with a lot of those people groups. Most of them didn't even think they really existed. They did exist, just not in such an epic way, like I said there. And epoch. Family. And of course, we did talk about the Cycladic Minoan and Mycenaeans. And now I'm going to ask you guys if you can sum those things up. We kind of summed up Cycladic art, but let's just do it one other time to make sure we got it.
Like Pompeii.
Pompeii.
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. No, Cycladic art is
Simple. Yeah, very simple. Can we sum up Minoan art? Bull. Yeah, a lot of bulls. What else?
A lot of depictions of nature.
Nature. Yeah.
and architect.
And architecture. The architecture was unique. And of course the Mycenaeans. Rich, wealthy. They cared about fortified cities and power a bit more. They're more along the lines of the other groups that we've talked about so far.
More.
There's variety. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
I think I'd like to come.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Good. So if we were going to compare one of these people groups to the Mesopotamians, which group would compare the best? The Minoans? So the Mesopotamians love nature?
Well, they do.
Yeah. Mesopotamians are very concerned with power and wealth, and if you remember, they get conquered a lot. But there is a big difference. Mesopotamians care a lot about religion. And now I'm just asking random questions to see if we can draw connections. And I'm not going to take up any more of your time. I could ask a lot more questions, but I'm not going to. Okay. Your quiz is open. You can take it when you want to. Brandon took it. How long did it take you?
A
while.
An hour and 30.
Yeah.
I just typed a lot. That's why.
I can just give you an idea.
You can make it easier.
Yeah, you can make it easier if you want to. You can make it harder if you want to.
Yeah, I wasn't being.
It's up to you.
Have the questions and
you can pre-type them and copy and paste it. Yeah, that works for me. Yep, totally fine with that. Next week, like I keep hinting, oh yeah, there you go. Fun stuff. Next week we are doing ancient Greece. Starting off on Monday, it's going to take a few days. We can't do Greece in one day. It's the biggest chapter in your book. We can't do it in one day. So we're going to do that a few times. Some of the myths that we went over today, though, we'll go over again on Monday and Tuesday and probably Wednesday. Yeah. And anyone that is interested in the first video that I skipped, I'm going to play it. You don't have to watch it. You can watch it on your own time. This is already up on your Canvas page under your modules too. So you don't have to stick around, but I'm going to be in here for a little bit longer. So
The Iliad is one monster of a book. It's more than 600.
But you're welcome to go. Have a good weekend. I'll see you all on Monday. Yeah.
Long, and the crazy part was it used to be passed down to oral tradition, meaning it was someone's job to memorize the darning and regurgitate it into the willing ears of whoever was listening. On top of that, if I had to guess how many named characters were in it, I'd put the number somewhere between 200 and too many. Luckily for us, though, there's only a few characters we actually need to care about. On the Trojan side, those are Hector, Paris, and Helen. And on the Greek side, we've got Achilles, Patroclus, Odysseus, Agamemnon, Menelaus, Diomedes, Ajax the Greater, and Ajax the Lesser. Now, back in the day, Troy was called Ilias, which is why the book is called the Iliad. Translated literally, it'd be called Troy Story. You got a friend in me. Yeah. Book 1. So our story begins 9 years into the Trojan War, when Agamemnon makes the dumbest decision of his life and angers Achilles, the most powerful warrior in his entire army. Basically, Agamemnon had taken this girl Chryseis prisoner, and her father, a priest of Apollo, came to try and get her back. He offered Agamemnon untold riches or whatever, which Agamemnon turned down on the principle of being unpleasant. So predictably enough, this powerful and desperate priest of Apollo prayed to the god in question, who gladly started raining down plagues upon the Greek army. Agamemnon is somehow surprised at pissing off this super powerful deity who goes so badly for him, but still refuses to return the girl until Achilles starts verbally slapping him around, to the point that Athena has to physically come down and stop him from straight up murdering his commanding officer. By the way, you may have noticed that there seems to be an awful lot of gods in this story. No, you ain't seen nothing yet. So Agamemnon finally agrees to return the girl to her father, but there's one condition. Achilles will, in exchange, have to give Agamemnon his chosen lady toy, a gorgeous lass named Briseis. Achilles, though thoroughly bummed, does the smart thing and gives her up. Then he does the not smart thing and refuses to fight. He curls up into a sulky blanket burrito in his tent and refuses to come out for anything. Now, Achilles is by far the most powerful Greek warrior among them. Later myths even painting he was invincible. So this is a pretty hefty loss for the Greek forces. Achilles then proceeds to make things even worse for them by praying to his mom, a minor goddess named Thetis, to get Zeus to help the Trojans. That's right. He's so angry at Agamemnon that he's willing to make them lose the war out of spite. Of course, since I also hate Agamemnon, this doesn't really bother me all that much, but still, not cool, bro. Book 2. So, Zeus, as we all know, likes nothing better than massacring his mortals, so he's all for this plan. He sends a dream to Agamemnon urging him to attack Troy full force and promising him victory. So Agamemnon's like, great idea. Nothing bad has ever come from me listening to the gods. And then Hector hears a similar message from Zeus and immediately marshals his forces to attack. Book 3 is a list. It's just a list. The person rattling off the list is Helen, who punctuates her description of the Greeks with a lot of self-loathing commentary. But wait, this book actually has some action. Shock, I know. Menelaus, Helen's real husband, challenges Paris, Helen's current husband, to a duel. Paris is all for this plan, but there's just one problem. Paris is a total whip. Menelaus kicks his booty, but before he can kill him and solve the war for good, Aphrodite decides to intervene and whisk Paris off the battlefield and off to Helen's chambers. Helen's like, gosh darn Aphrodite, what do you want? And Aphrodite's like, now kiss! Side note. That interaction pretty much summarizes the entire dynamic between Paris, Helen, and Aphrodite. The story is a little more complicated than this, but basically, Aphrodite promised Paris the hand of the most beautiful woman in the world in exchange for a golden apple, specifically the golden apple of Discord, crafted by Ares, goddess of Discord, who was exceedingly upset after not getting invited to a wedding. The other two contenders for the golden apple were Athena and Hera, who you'd think would have better things to do. He accepted, and Aphrodite held up her end of the bargain by kidnapping Helen from her comfortable life as Menelaus' wife and delivering her to Paris, although some versions involve Paris kidnapping her himself. So basically, at this point, Aphrodite has done nothing but mess up Helen's life, and the whole war is also kind of her fault, so it's no surprise that nobody in the story really likes her that much. Anyway, back to the actual plot. So back on the battlefield, Menelaus is an unholy degree of scruntle, riding in circles, frothing at the mouth, yelling, come back here and die like a man. You know the works. So then in book 4, the gods discuss what to do and decide that abject chaos is way more fun than peaceful resolution. So Athena pops down into the Trojan ranks and double dog dares and archers shoot at Menelaus. The arrow whips, the temporary truce between the two armies immediately dissolves, and they all go back to wailing on each other. So book 5 is all about this lesser known but incredibly cool Greek hero, Diomedes. So Diomedes is tearing through the Trojan army, like you do. When Athena notices that two gods she particularly dislikes, Aphrodite and Ares, happen to be interfering with the battle. So she pops down to Diomedes like, hey, so I've given you magic eyeballs. Now you can tell who's secretly God and who's not. And let me be clear about this. Do not fight the gods. You will lose. Unless Aphrodite and fight all you want. She's somehow moving marshmallow fluff and a baby chicken from the battle cross. So Diomedes acknowledges and continues to tear his way through the army when suddenly he sees Aphrodite doing her thing and lifting one of her injured dudes off the battlefield. Diomedes is like, none of that, and chucks a spear from her wrist. So she's like, ow, I strenuously object, and drops the dude in question and zips back to Olympus, whining incessantly. Meanwhile, back at the front, Apollo grabs the dude Aphrodite was trying to save. His name is Aeneas, by the way. He's got his own book or something, I don't know. And Diomedes immediately tries to stab him. Apollo's like, step off, kid. Some of us gods are a little sturdier than Aphrodite. And Diomedes does the smart thing and backs off. And then Ares shows up. Yay! So Athena's like, Diomedes, why aren't you hitting him? And he's like, because you told me not to? And she's like, forget what I said, kid. You're the best. Hooray! And then Diomedes stabs Ares in the gut, which video game logic tells me must make him the new god of war. So Ares runs home to Zeus crying, and Zeus is like, bad up, you gigantic disappointment. So now Ares hurts on the outside and the inside. Book 6 is pretty boring. Someone tells Hector to tell the women of Troy to pray to Athena to stop Diomedes from single-handedly killing every single one of them. So he does, and they do, but she doesn't, and he continues to be awesome. Book 7 is a little more interesting. Apollo's like, hey Athena, you know what would be cool? If your chosen hero didn't attend the war one day. That'd be cool, right? And Athena's like, you make an excellent point. Let's stop the war and make Hector fight someone. So they pause the war again. I really don't think it should be that easy. And the various Greek heroes we actually care about hold an impromptu lottery to see who gets to fight Hector. Great Ajax, not to be confused with Lesser Ajax, wins the lottery and he and Hector duke it out until nightfall, at which point they both call it a day and go home. So book 8 is called The Tide of Battle Turns, and that's basically what happens. The Greeks start losing, the Trojans start winning. Now it's time for book 9. So Agamemnon's like, gosh darn it, it's almost like we're missing our strongest fighter and the gods are working against us. What do you know? So Agamemnon's like, I vote we run away. Who wants to run away? And Diomedes is like, you've got to be kidding me. You called us cowards and now you want us to cut and run? God, this guy is so cool. So Agamemnon's like, no, what I meant to say was, who wants to go talk to Achilles and get him to fight with us again? So he sends Ajax and Odysseus to talk to Achilles, who's still burritoed up in his tent with Patroclus. So Ajax and Odysseus are like, yo, Agamemnon's willing to give you your girlfriend back, along with a ridiculous amount of wealth and a few kingdoms if you get out there and help us fight. And Achilles is like, nope, he's a jerk. In fact, I sail home tomorrow unless something really tragic and unnecessary happens to make me stay and fight. Hey, but isn't my best buddy Patroclus? I don't know what I'd do if this guy died. That, folks, is what we in the writing biz call foreshadowing. Book 10 is basically a Metal Gear Solid mission. Not even kidding. So it's night, and Agamemnon and Menelaus gather some main characters and are like, okay, do we have some volunteers to infiltrate the Trojan camp and find out their plans? And Diomedes is like, well, I did just finish carving a bloody canyon through the Trojan forces, so sure, I'm game. And Odysseus is like, you'll want me as well. I have actual cognitive faculties, quite rare among this army. So Odysseus, the only sneaky guy in the entire Greek army, gets partnered up with my man Diomedes for a stealth mission. That's right, this epic officially has everything now. But at the same time, in the Trojan camp, Hector has the same idea and sends a much less important character to scout the Greek ships. Predictably enough, the two stealth teams encounter each other, and Diomedes and Odysseus capture and interrogate the poor guy. He's like, I'll tell you everything. And Odysseus is like, I approve wholeheartedly. And then they decapitate him. Using the information Odysseus extracted from him, they sneak into the Trojan camp and steal an extremely fancy chariot and some armor from a king.
Kind of like a fun version of the Iliad.
If it was actually, it had this type of energy, it would have been.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Yeah.
Now it's time for book 11. The sun rises and it's back to where we go. So today is Agamemnon's time to shine. And while he's busy kicking his fury or taking names, some minor hero that Achilles is fond of gets wounded. So Achilles is like, hey Patroclus, can you go out there and ask Nestor who that was? I need to make sure before I start feeling sad. So Patroclus does, and Nestor's like, hey, so it sure is nice of Achilles to feel bad when his friends start getting hurt. But, it'd be even better if, he helped out so that didn't happen. So yeah, can you maybe have a talk with him about that? And Patroclus is like, I only promised to try. Book 12, the war continues. Zeus smacks the Greeks with a thunderstorm, allowing the Trojans to start beating them. Man, divine intervention is such a hack. So this pushes the Greeks all the way back to the ships. And in book 13, Poseidon gets a little sick of Zeus hogging the show, so he drops by to give the Greeks a little help by buffing the two Ajaxes with some stat boosts. So then the Greeks start winning. In book 14, Hera uses her feminine wiles to distract Zeus from his efforts to buff the Trojans and depower the Greeks. So the Greek army continues to win. In book 15, Zeus wakes up after being thoroughly wild by Hera and gets severely disgruntled to see that his favorite side is now losing. Ares is like, hey, I think my king's gonna just die. This looks like a lovely war. And Athena dope slaps the armor off him like, hey, Zeus is already bad enough. If you remind me how much of a failure you are, we'll get even better. And Ares is like, oh. So the tide of battle turns again, and the Trojans start winning. At this point, it's really become formulaic. By the time book 16 rolls around, Patroclus has gotten back to Achilles like, hey, dude, could I persuade you to go out and fight? Our guys are kind of getting destroyed. I mean, even Agamemnon is injured. And Achilles is like, ha, nice. And Patroclus is like, seriously, Achilles, they're dying out there. They need our help. And Achilles is like, well, I really can't have them burn our ships. Tell you what, you go out in my armor and leave my army. The Trojans will never know the difference between us. And Patroclus is like, anything for you, man. And Achilles is like, just one thing. Promise me you'll come back alive. Patroclus is like, of course I will. And not 5 minutes later, Hector kills him. Book 17 is pretty uneventful. The Greeks see Patroclus go down and collectively hulk out to defend his body, and Hector takes Achilles' armor and whirls it around. Book 18, the battle continues, although now it's centered around defending Patroclus' corpse. Meanwhile, Achilles is still burritoed up in his tent, having no idea that his bestie is currently dead. That is, until a messenger arrives bearing those very tidings, causing Achilles to similarly hulk out. He's like, that's it, time to single-handedly kick Troy, besides posterior. And his mom Venus is like, no, Achilles, you're ready to die if you fight. And he's like, I couldn't save my hetero life partner, Mom, this life isn't worth living anymore. And then the rest of the chapter is devoted to Hephaestus making Achilles new duds. In book 19, Achilles puts on his new duds. Yeah, this epic kind of drags on in places. In Book 20, Achilles carves a bloody murder canyon through the Trojan forces despite various gods' best attempts to stop him. In Book 21, Achilles fills a river with so many corpses that the river itself gets addled and starts trying to drown it. So he beats it up until it stops bothering him. Then he gets distracted and starts chasing Apollo around the city because all the best heroes have ADD. He's has to be side-questing Skyrim player. In Book 22, Achilles finally remembers what he's there for, and after an extremely slapstick routine where he chases Hector around Troy several times, he finally kills him. Yay! Then he ties Hector's body to his chariot and rides it around Troy 3 times to parade the body off to Hector's father, the king. Yay? The rest of the book is actually pretty boring. The Greeks hold Patroclus' funeral, during which they basically just play a lot of party games. And then at some point after the Iliad cuts off, but before they officially sack Troy, Achilles gets shot in the heel by Paris and dies. Yay!
Yay.
Yep.
Awesome.
Quite amazing.
It was a fun one.
Interesting.
Yeah.
The actual book.
Yeah, way better than the actual thing.
I'm pretty sure that Achilles requested that his ashes be put in the urn with Patroclus's.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Yep, right. Oh, yep, it's great.